Over the past couple of years, I've been absolutely infatuated with a few characters in history, one of them being Saddam Hussein for various reasons. A few of the reasons is I'm trying to understand how someone who was so controversial and hated was also at the same time loved and revered by many. I also want to explore how the Assyrian people were under Saddam Hussein's regime, were affected negatively or positively, and how that resulted in them becoming in the diaspora, such as America, Canada, Australia, and other countries. Lastly, I want to understand if there's any legitimacy behind the American invasion of Iraq in 2003. We're going to get to the bottom of that today. Today, I have with me a man who, at the age of 17 years old, joined the new Iraqi military, and at 19 years old was upgraded to sergeant major, making him one of the youngest to ever do it. Hamody Jasim, thank you so much for making the time.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure being here.
You are one of the most non-biased voices I could possibly find in the world to cover this topic, because you come from a Kurdish, Turkish, and Iraqi background. You were born into a Muslim family. You had Assyrian friends. Then you fight for the side of the Americans. You had boots on the ground. You lived through the Gulf War. You've lived in Iraq during the time. You are one of the most non-biased parties I could find to get perspective of what was happening in that region of the world at the time. There's criticism on the way that Saddam handled Kurds, gassing them, helicopter turrets from above, all these things. But the Kurds were also letting Iranians through their routes and through their villages, hiding them, smuggling them into Iraq. So in America even, that could be considered treason, and treason is a punishment by death sentence.
Yeah.
So was Saddam just doing what any leader should do, or was the criticism in the ways that he handled treason?
I'll say prior to him gassing the Kurds, did really Saddam have an animosity against the Kurds? I don't think so. Based on what I've seen, he did not have any animosity against the Kurds. He actually liked the Kurds. The problem he had with the Kurds wanted their independence, which is, it's their right. When we talk about the deals that were made back in the day to not allow Kurds to have their own country, that's really, really unfair. This is a massive nation that's everywhere, in Turkey, in Syria, and Iraq, and they are not Arabs. The problem that the biggest conflict we have right now between the Kurds and Arab, even during Saddam, is that Saddam believed the Kurds were Iraqis, and he did not want to refer anything else to them other than being Iraqi Kurds. You're talking about a dictator that believes in nationalism. The Baathists are nationalists.
Mm-hmm.
He wanted the Kurds to admit the part they are Iraqi Kurds. And if the Kurds have actually gave him that, that's why he didn't care about them having their own independence. That's why Erbil and Soleimani was doing whatever they do. But that's what it's about.
I understand that, but then why didn't he give the Assyrians the same slack? Why was he more lenient towards Assyrian Christians versus Kurds? Why didn't the Iranians also use the Assyrians to cause uprisings if they were also non-Arabs living in Iraq as well?
The Kurds are absolutely more motivated to fight. They really believe in their ideology. They want to be independent. They want to be them. And the Kurds realize they don't have any friends other than the mountain. The mountain is the only friend to the Kurds and has been through history. Saddam is not stupid when it comes to minorities. Saddam have tried every single political thing out there, used the right people to try to take minorities under his wing as much as possible. But if these minorities were going to be against the ideology of the Ba'ath Party, that's when Saddam would get violent. I do believe at that time Saddam would have cared less what your background, what your ethnicity. If you have taken the Iranian side, he will absolutely get rid of you in 5 seconds. And perhaps I don't think it's even have anything to do with the Assyrians or the Kurds. If Tikrit, the hometown of Saddam, has taken the side of the Iranian, he would absolutely have chemical weapons that would be used against that place.
His own
hometown. I mean, Christians, the poor guys, they got nothing to say. They're a minority.
How are they treated?
I mean, they were treated fairly. To be honest, Christians were not mistreated by Iraqis. We loved them. I mean, we loved living with Christians. We loved everything about them. We learned a lot from them. And they were the most peaceful people in Iraq, honestly.
Specifically Assyrians.
I mean, Assyrians, some other minority Christians as well. I think we have people of Armenian descent. There are also, Christians as well. Actually, some Christians were working for the government. Some Christians were working for the government of Saddam. I know Christians who were working in the Iraqi intelligence at the time. So don't let the minority thing fool you when it comes to how Saddam Hussein carried himself. Saddam Hussein had a minister of foreign affairs that was a Christian. Saddam Hussein did not care what your religion, what your background, what you are. Saddam cared about how loyal are you to the Ba'ath Party. Do you believe in the Ba'athist principle versus your religion or your background? And we all know, and most people would know, Saddam was not a big fan of religious Ba'athist. It didn't work out. And when they asked him why, I mean, they told him at the time, and it was by his deputy, he said, we're Muslims. And, we are, there's nothing wrong with being religious. And Saddam said, you know what? If the Ba'athist that goes to the mosque and prays in a certain way versus the other Muslim who prays in another way, what do I tell the Christian and the small minorities in Iraq? So that's a proof to show you that Saddam actually cared about these minorities and wanted to make sure they belong in Iraq more than anything.
But let's transition to this.
Yeah.
You mentioned that if you spoke English in Iraq at that time under Saddam, it was considered the language of the enemy.
Of course.
What would happen if you were caught speaking English?
So I'll give you a story about that. You had nobody to speak English to. That's to begin with. If you spoke English on the road to somebody for some reason, yeah, you'll end up somewhere under the ground.
Dead.
But, oh yeah, you'll absolutely be done. Because they will think you are communicating with foreign intelligence, that you work with somebody.
So the only language was Arabic. Okay, so now this gets back to my minority point with Assyrians. Assyrians have their own language. Kurds have their own language. What happens if they were speaking anything other than Arabic?
That was not an issue.
Really?
Yes. Actually, Saddam had implemented the Kurdish language in the schools at the time. We had a class we used to take learning the Kurdish language, because his goal was to get everybody under the same umbrella, is to make sure we understand each other despite of our background. And at the end of the day, we're all Ba'athist. So it wouldn't be fair to say, Saddam had put down the small minorities over others because of the language or their background. He actually didn't force people to speak Arabic. He learned some Kurdish himself. There are videos of him trying to speak to a Kurdish man in his own language. I think there's a lot of misconceptions about what kind of a dictator Saddam was and what his ideology was. And it's kind of crazy because in some ways you'll find Saddam that very politically correct with you until you disagree with his ideologies.
So it's purely political with him. It's not so much culture and ethnicity.
No.
So let's get into some of the issues with the prison systems under Saddam. So it's no secret that he had some of the cruelest forms of torture ever, some of them being the following: executed whole family bloodlines if one member of the family spoke out against Saddam and the government. He would break glass into men's rectums in the prisons as a form of torture. He practiced electric shock tortures, hanging you upside down for days at a time, starvation methods, feeding to dogs. The list goes on. It's insane. But I want to touch on Assyrians really quickly first. With the Assyrian people, so you made a good point. You made it clear that Saddam didn't care so much of culture and ethnicity. It's more so about politics. But the Kurds had their own political parliament that they were trying to establish, which was Saddam was suppressing. And then the Assyrians attempted to do the same thing with the organization called Zoa. There was 3 founders. They were executed under Saddam Hussein. Assyrians weren't able to celebrate the Assyrian New Year's openly in the streets. They weren't allowed to call themselves Assyrians, to what I've heard from people from that region at the time. They had to call themselves Christian Arabs. We said that the Ba'athist Party it's a national party, and let's clarify that. It's a communist party that believes in one Arab nation, correct? So to admit that there was anything before Iraq was to basically admit that there was no Iraq at one point, meaning that there were people before Iraq, meaning there was people before Saddam Hussein.
Yep.
So the people who originated in that land, who owned that land, the land between the 2 rivers, were the Assyrian people.
Yeah.
And so when Saddam came, he was so infatuated by the history of the Assyrians that he said that he was the reincarnation of Nebuchadnezzar, and he started to rebuild Babylon.
Yes.
He found a village that he thought Babylon would look beautiful in.
Yeah.
So he demolished a village where people were living their lives thriving, so he could build this little castle made of bricks. And in each brick that he laid down, every single one had his name in it.
Yeah.
He inscribed each of his name Saddam Hussein in every
Yep.
single brick
His initial, yeah, he would be
because he said that he was a reincarnation of.
Nabucodonosor.
So my point of saying all this is that he knew about the Assyrians. He knew
Yeah.
about what came before him, but he still had them be called Christian Arabs. You're Iraqi this.
Yes.
You are not allowed to celebrate your political party. You are not allowed to celebrate your Assyrian New Year because we cannot admit there were people before Iraq.
That is actually a fact, but that goes back to my original point, is that was it only just the Assyrians that were not allowed to celebrate their ancient history? The Shiite wanted to practice their own religious practices, believing on Imam Hussein in the south. And did Saddam really prevent them from all of it? No, Saddam says you can absolutely go to the tomb, you can visit, you can walk to it, do whatever you got to do. But if you do some of these traditions that would disagree with the ideology he has, that's when he would go hard on you. So the truth is, Saddam wanted people to celebrate their backgrounds, but moderate ways. Like
and
more
privately.
in a privacy,
Yeah.
and nothing that is way to an extreme. He had a limit on things, and the people that actually forced those limits were the Ba'ath Party members in those cities. I mean, I can guarantee you there are some Assyrians who were members of the Ba'ath Party.
Sure.
And they probably told the other Assyrians, here's what you can do, and here's what you can't do. The same thing with the Shiite. The Shiite in the south, majority of the people in the south were Shiite. We had some Sunni minorities who also were part of Saddam's government at the time, were very influential. But believe it or not, some of the most lethal Ba'ath Party members in the south were Shiite, or cousins and uncles of yours.
It's important to note that
Yeah.
Saddam was Sunni and he had a beef with the Shiite.
Yeah, I mean, the truth is Saddam really didn't care what your background was. Saddam cared about your loyalty to the Ba'ath Party, regardless of what your background is. And, you know, I have mentioned that before. Actually, Saddam trusted the Christians more than Muslims.
Saddam trusted Christians more than Muslims.
That's a fact.
How
When
so?
you go to Saddam's kitchen in his palace, you got to find the ethnicity and the background of every single person that made food for Saddam. They were Christians.
Because he was afraid the Shiite would poison him.
Not Shiite. He was
Sunni?
afraid of Muslims in general.
Even his own
Even his
religious
own
sect.
people. Anybody tells you that the opposite is wrong. Saddam had Christians working in his kitchen making food for him because he trusted them, not to a point it was more about a trust, but he thought they would not dare do what Muslims would do to him. So he had a very different mentality that you can never think of. Why would I put a minority in my kitchen making food for me versus Muslims? So Saddam was way above the religion, the backgrounds, and the ethnicities.
I see.
Saddam looked at humans in a very different way and through his eyes.
But one of the things that's interesting to me is that Saddam actually tried to have his son executed.
Yeah.
Uday kills Saddam's right-hand man, who
Yes.
was an Assyrian Christian man.
Yes.
Who
Kamal
was-
Hanna. Yeah.
What was his name?
Kamal Hanna.
And he was his taste tester, his bodyguard, and also one of his chefs.
Yes.
One night when the Egyptian king or prince was visiting Saddam at their Iraqi
It
palace,
was the Egyptian Hosni Mubarak's wife that was visiting, Suzan Mubarak at the time, yeah. So what happened is Kamal Hanna would having a party on the palace right next to where Suzan Mubarak was staying. And, you know, celebration in Iraq, they'll be shooting bullets in the air, AK-47. So Uday have sent somebody to Kamal Hanna to tell him to cool it down. And I think Kamal Hanna did not cool it down because he was drunk. They were known to always having parties and wild things. And it got Uday to go himself and got in an argument with Kamal Hanna and end up hitting him with something that ended up causing him his life. And that was, of course, one of the most painful things to Saddam Hussein, because Kamal Hanna was one of the most trusted person Saddam trusted. He was his right hand. And that goes to back up my early argument about how Saddam trusted the Christians. He was his most trusted black box. Perhaps there was some rumors saying that the second wife of Saddam Hussein, that he currently have, was found for him by Kamal Hanna himself.
Right.
So he was pretty much not just the bodyguard, not just the deputy and the assistant or the bodyguard. He was pretty much like Saddam pimp in a way.
Best
He was
friend.
best of friend. He knew all his secrets, and Saddam loved him like a son. So this was really hard for Saddam to lose Kamal Hanna the way he did. And in a way, yeah, you can say Kamal Hanna was the most influential person in the country. I think Saddam tried to make it up to the family, and then the family of Kamal Hanna showed up and said, we dropped the charges against Uday. I mean,
Well, what I believe happened was Saddam sentenced him to death.
mm-hmm.
Uday's mother pled with the Jordanian king
Hussein,
to ask Saddam to release him.
Yeah.
Saddam said, all right, well, if a king comes to you in your hometown, your home country, you have to abide.
I mean,
as a respect, he granted him that and sent him to, I believe, Switzerland or Sweden.
Let's be honest, they were not going to execute him. Yeah, Saddam maybe was mad because he lost Kamal Hanna, but they were not going to execute him. And instead, they took him to Switzerland, and he played poker, and he gambled on a vacation until things got settled up.
Which then he ended up killing someone there, and then he couldn't get charged because he's an Iraqi citizen.
Yeah,
so he was sent back.
He is an absolute animal, and yeah, they weren't really going to hold him accountable. And
so that was BS. That was a cover-up.
It was BS, and they brought the family of Kamal Hanna stating that we are dropping the charges, and please let him go for us. I mean, of course, these poor people lost their son, and they probably were spoken to about what to say in front of Saddam so they could put this argument to sleep and let Uday out of prison, supposedly, that went out of prison. He was in Switzerland with his uncle, and he was just out of control.